Story 1. I've always loved the sound snow makes when it comes down heavy and quiet. It's one of those rare things you can't control or predict perfectly, like catching a flash of lightning in the distance or seeing a streak of light cut across the sky. Most of the time, it's just normal weather, but every once in a while, it turns into something you can feel in your chest. When that happens, I get this urge to go outside that I can't really explain. I'm not even much of a hiker. I don't wake up excited to hit trails or track miles. But if it's snowing, especially at night, it's like my brain flips into a different mode. I live in a pretty woodsy area, not deep in the forest, but close enough that if I want dense woods, I can be there in a few minutes by car. This happened on one of those nights where I didn't have anything important the next morning. I'm pretty sure it was a Saturday because I remember feeling that dull, slightly nauseous kind of tired you get after going out the night before. I was a little hungover, just enough that I'd been taking it easy staying in my room and reading. The weird part was, it wasn't supposed to snow. I'm one of those people who checks the weather way too often in the winter, and I'd looked earlier that day. There was nothing about a storm, nothing about flurries, nothing at all. I was sitting there with my book when it started, suddenly, like someone had turned it on. At first I didn't even notice. Then I looked out and saw the window filling with white movement. By the time it fully registered, the ground already had a layer on it, like it had been snowing longer than it had. I didn't think it through. I just knew I wanted to take a snow walk. There's a local trail I like because it's usually empty. It's secluded, doesn't get much traffic, and at night, it feels like you've stepped into a different world. I drove there, parked, and for a few seconds, I just stood outside my car and watched the snow fall in the headlights. Everything looked softer, quieter, like the sound had been wrapped up. Then I started walking. I didn't go with a plan. No destination, no goal other than getting far enough in that the road noise disappeared and the trees closed around me. I wanted to be surrounded by it, to hear that muffled silence you only get when snow is coming down steady. After about 20 minutes, I remember thinking I'd gone far enough. The trail behind me was already starting to blur under fresh snow, and the air felt colder the deeper I got. I stopped just to take it in. That's when I heard it. It was a sound that didn't fit. It didn't belong out there. At first, my brain refused to accept what it was, like it had to run it through a few times. Then it clicked, and my stomach tightened. A child's voice. I stood there listening, waiting for my mind to correct itself. I told myself it had to be something else, some weird trick of distance or wind. But then it happened again, clearer this time. A little boy yelled, "Hi!" That doesn't sound scary on paper. It's one of the most harmless things a kid could say. But in that moment, alone in the woods at night with snow falling, it felt completely wrong. And what bothered me, almost as much as the voice itself, was that I couldn't place it. It wasn't coming from one obvious direction. It seemed like it could be anywhere around me. I turned fast, scanning the trees, expecting to see someone's silhouette between the trunks. There was nothing. I pivoted again, quicker, my breath showing in front of my face, trying to catch movement. No one. I started looking in every direction, even down the trail behind me. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. After a few seconds, the rational part of me kicked in, and I decided to head back to my car. Whatever was going on, I didn't want to be out there for it. Then the voice called out again. This time it said, "Up here, silly." I didn't even stop to think about how strange that was. I just looked up. And that's when I saw him. There was a little boy, maybe 9 years old, sitting on a branch in a tree not far off the trail. It was such a bizarre sight that it took me a second to understand what I was looking at. He was bundled for the cold, and he looked comfortable up there, like he belonged on that branch. Seeing him should have made me feel better, and in a way, it did. At least the unknown wasn't unknown anymore, but almost immediately, my mind started catching up with everything that was wrong. The lowest branch was ridiculously high, around 20 feet off the ground, not something a kid climbs casually, especially in winter, especially at night. The trunk was straight, not the kind of tree with easy footholds. And as I moved closer, another detail hit me so hard it made my skin prickle. There were no footprints around the base of the tree. The snow had already built up on the ground by the time I arrived. If he had walked over there after it started, there should have been tracks. But there was nothing. Just smooth snow, with my own prints approaching, which meant he'd been up there before it started snowing. And since I'd noticed the snowfall begin almost 45 minutes earlier, that meant he could have been sitting in that tree the entire time, alone, waiting. I stepped closer, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. He was smiling at me, but it wasn't a normal kid smile. It was too wide and too stiff, like he was trying to copy what a smile was supposed to look like without understanding it. It gave me this uneasy feeling, like I was looking at something pretending to be familiar. He lifted a hand and waved. I didn't wave back. I didn't even think about being polite. I just asked him how he got up there. My voice sounded thin in the cold. He told me it was a secret. Then he just went back to that stretched grin. I stood there, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. My first thought was that this kid didn't belong out here, and my second thought was that getting him down safely seemed almost impossible. I wasn't going to climb that tree. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't see how, and I couldn't just leave either, not with a child perched that high in the dark. Before I could decide what to say next, he stood up on the branch, like he had perfect balance. He didn't seem scared at all. He looked down at me like he was about to show off. He said something like, "Watch this," and then he leaned backward and dropped. For a split second, I thought he was joking and would catch himself. He didn't. He fell straight down at least 30 feet, and I screamed so loud my throat hurt. My mind raced through the horrible math of it. Bones, neck, skull, the way he would hit. He landed flat on his back with a sickening thud that I felt in my chest. I froze. I was sure I had just watched a kid die. Then I ran. I sprinted toward him, slipping a little in the snow, my hands already out like I could do something, like I could rewind it. But before I even reached him, the boy jolted upright like nothing had happened. Not a slow, injured movement. He popped up and took off running deeper into the woods. It didn't make sense. There's no way a fall like that should have been survivable, snow or not. My brain kept insisting I'd seen it wrong, but I hadn't. I watched him hit the ground. I yelled again, this time more out of shock than fear, and I stood there staring as he disappeared between the trees. Even with the snow reflecting what little light there was, the woods were still dark enough that he vanished quickly. And I don't know what took over in my head, but instead of doing the smart thing, turning around and going back, I chased him. I still can't explain why. I know myself. In almost any other scenario, I would have backed away immediately. I would have been gone. But something about the fact that it was a kid, something about the confusion of what I'd just seen, made me move without thinking. I ran until I could see his tracks again, and then followed them, telling myself he couldn't be far. The snow made his footprints obvious, little dents in the fresh powder leading off the trail. After a few seconds, I heard him laughing. It wasn't normal laughter, it was loud and sharp, almost like a cackle, and it bounced strangely through the trees. It sounded like he was enjoying how scared I was, like this was all some kind of game. I kept running, eyes locked on the trail of footprints, breathing hard, the cold air burning my lungs. His tracks veered past a tree just off the path. As I passed it, something hit my back. It wasn't like getting bumped. It was a sudden weight, arms clamping around me, and I pitched forward. My boots slid and I went down into the snow, catching myself wrong and rolling. Before I could even get my bearings, he was on top of me. The boy, this skinny little kid, was clawing at my neck and shoulders like an animal. His hands were everywhere, digging in, tearing, and I screamed, trying to push him off. His fingernails raked across my skin, and I felt warm wetness immediately. Felt it running down under my collar. He started making this high, frantic noise too, like he was wailing and laughing at the same time. I threw my arms up to protect my face because my mind flashed to the thought of him going for my eyes. I was panicking so hard my vision tunneled, and all I could think was, get him off, Get him off. I managed to get a knee under me and stand, half dragging him, half stumbling. With everything I had, I grabbed and twisted, and I flung him over my shoulder. He hit the ground, rolled, and popped right back up. Then he bolted again, running deeper into the woods, still making that awful laughing sound like it was fun for him. That time, I didn't follow. I just stood there, shaking, trying to understand what had happened. My hands were slick. When I looked down, they were covered in my own blood. The cuts didn't feel deep the way a knife cut would, but there was a lot of blood, more than I expected, and it was pouring down my neck into my shirt. I hadn't worn a scarf, which I immediately regretted. I ripped my hat off and pressed it hard against my neck, wrapping it as tight as I could to slow the bleeding. My fingers were trembling so badly I kept fumbling the fabric. My heart was racing, and I realized I was starting to hyperventilate. I remember thinking, in a detached way, that I was having a panic attack. The next stretch of time is blurry. I don't remember the walk back clearly. I know I must have found the trail again. I know I must have made it to the parking lot. But the fear and the blood loss made it all feel like it happened behind fogged glass. The next thing I remember clearly is being in the back of an ambulance, bright lights above me, someone asking me questions while they worked on my neck. After that, I remember sitting with police officers trying to explain what had happened. I had to tell the story over and over, like they were waiting for it to change into something that made sense. At the time, I didn't understand why they looked at me the way they did. I thought the unbelievable part was that a kid had attacked me in the woods. I didn't realize what they were actually stuck on until later. While I was in the hospital, they went out and searched the trail. They told me they found nothing, no child, no evidence anyone else had been there. What made it worse was what they said about the footprints. They claimed they followed the tracks and only found one set, mine. When I heard that, I was completely wrecked. I got angry, convinced they just hadn't looked hard enough. I kept picturing that boy's face and those hands ripping at my neck, and the idea that it had somehow left no trace made me feel like I was being dismissed. But at the same time, why would they lie about something like that? By the time I was discharged and finished answering questions, I was drained. I don't even know if it was the next day or 2 days later. The timeline is messed up in my head because everything after the attack blended together. Eventually, I drove back to the trail anyway. It had snowed a lot more since that night. The ground was smoother, deeper, and it wasn't surprising that my old footprints were gone, filled in and buried under fresh snow. But I still went. I walked around for hours, searching through the forest like I could force the woods to give me an answer. I checked near the tree. I followed the trail. I looked for anything. Broken branches, disturbed snow, another set of tracks, something I could point to and say, "See, this happened." There was nothing. No sign of a child. No sign that anyone else had ever been there with me. And that's still one of the most unsettling things that's ever happened to me, because the cuts on my neck healed. But I never got an explanation for what left them there in the first place. Story 2. This happened over winter break during my sophomore year of college. I was 19 and my parents were gone, so I had the house to myself for just under 2 weeks. At first, it felt like a small vacation. I stayed up late, slept in, and did basically whatever I wanted. Then during the second week, a huge snowstorm rolled in. The forecasts had been warning about it for days, saying it was going to be intense, and for once they weren't exaggerating. When I woke up that Saturday morning, there was already almost a foot on the ground, and the snow was still coming down thick and steady. The plows couldn't keep up, and by late afternoon, the roads looked like they'd been erased. Cars weren't even trying to drive. Everything just stopped. I should also explain what my neighborhood is like. It's not one of those tight suburbs where every house is right on top of the next. The houses are spaced out, and there are wooded stretches between properties. In the summer, it's pretty and quiet. In the winter, it can feel cut off, like you're living on the edge of nowhere. That night, with the storm having buried everything and the streets completely empty, it felt even more isolated. By around 6 in the evening, I was losing my mind from boredom. The Wi-Fi had gone out while I was asleep, so I couldn't play games, stream anything, or really do much besides stare at my phone and watch the signal do nothing. I tried reading for a bit, tried pacing around, tried eating out of pure boredom, but it didn't help. For context, I only had one close friend from my hometown, and his name was Ryan. I knew he was around because we'd hung out the day before, so while I was sitting there in my room, restless and trapped inside, I got this idea that felt hilarious at the time. I decided I was going to walk to his house and surprise him. The roads were obviously not drivable, but I figured walking was different. It was only about 1.5 miles, maybe a little more depending on the route. I'd walked farther than that plenty of times. Looking back, it was a dumb plan, but I was 19, bored, and convinced it would be funny to show up at his door looking like I'd been through a blizzard. So I bundled up, threw on boots, and headed out. The first part of the walk was actually kind of nice. By then, the snow had slowed down and mostly stopped, and everything looked like it had been covered in a thick, clean layer of white. The streetlights made the snow glow, and the whole neighborhood had this soft, washed-out look, like a photo with the brightness turned up. It was also incredibly quiet. All I could really hear was my breathing and the crunch of my boots packing snow with each step. No engines, no voices, no dogs barking. It didn't even feel like there were people in the houses around me. It was peaceful in a way that also made me feel weirdly exposed. About halfway to Ryan's, the road cuts through an area where there aren't any houses for a stretch. It's mostly trees lining both sides and a couple of empty lots. During the day, it's nothing, just part of the route. But that night, with snow piled up and the woods pressing in on both sides, it felt completely different. That's when it really hit me how alone I was out there. I remember slowing down a little without even realizing it, like my body was trying to keep me closer to the last streetlight behind me. I kept going anyway, hands shoved into my pockets, shoulders tight, telling myself I was just being dramatic. Then I saw headlights up ahead. They were far off, but they were coming from the same direction I was walking toward. I stopped and watched them approach, trying to figure out what kind of vehicle would even be out in weather like that. As it got closer, it became obvious. It was a snowplow. It was moving really slowly, crawling down the road, and I figured the driver was just doing their best with how bad the conditions were. I stayed off to the side, waiting for it to pass. But before it reached me, it suddenly jerked hard to the right. Not a gradual drift, not a careful turn. It snapped to the side like the driver had either lost control or swerved to miss something. The headlights cut across the road, and then the whole vehicle disappeared into the tree line. I heard a heavy, muffled crunch from inside the woods, like metal and packed snow and wood all colliding at once. Then everything went still again. My first thought was immediate. Someone just crashed. I started moving toward where it went off the road, at first fast, then running. The snow was deep, and I couldn't move the way I wanted to, but I wasn't thinking about that. All I could picture was a driver hurt in the cab, maybe stuck, maybe bleeding, and me being the only person anywhere near enough to help. It took a few minutes to reach the spot because the snow kept grabbing at my boots. When I got there, I could see the gouged path where the plow had left the road. I followed the tire tracks into the trees until I found it. The scene was exactly what I expected. The front end of the snowplow was crushed into a tree, bent and crumpled. The headlights were still on, throwing light across the snow, and I could hear the engine still running. That low, steady rumble, like it didn't realize anything was wrong. I ran up to the driver's side, already bracing myself for something horrible. I expected to see someone slumped over the wheel or stuck awkwardly, maybe knocked out. I leaned in and looked through the window. The driver's seat was empty. For a second, I honestly didn't process it. My brain just kept trying to replace what I was seeing with what should have been there. I thought maybe the driver had been thrown out somehow. So I looked around in the snow, expecting to see a trail or a body, but the windshield wasn't shattered. There wasn't broken glass everywhere. Nothing about it suggested someone had been ejected. I moved around to the passenger side and looked in. That seat was empty too. I remember feeling this quick flash of frustration, like I was missing something obvious. I yanked open the driver's door, thinking maybe the person had slid down below the dashboard or was lying across the floor. The inside of the cab was cold and still. No movement, no sound besides the engine. There was no one in there, not anywhere. It took me a few seconds to fully understand that the entire plow was empty. There was literally nowhere else someone could have been hiding. I just stood there in the snow, staring at this wrecked vehicle with its headlights shining and its engine still running, and I felt this creeping certainty that something was seriously off. Then I looked down. There were no footprints, no tracks leading away from the plow, no sign someone had climbed out and walked into the woods. Whoever had been driving it hadn't just left. They disappeared. I can't describe exactly what that moment felt like, but it was like my body decided before my brain did. This heavy, urgent feeling hit me all at once like a warning siren in my gut. I needed to leave. Now. It wasn't a thought I carefully considered. It was pure instinct. I backed away from the plow, keeping my eyes on it like it might do something, then turned and started heading back toward the road. As soon as I started walking back the way I came, I heard a voice behind me. A man's voice shouting for help. The sound stopped me for a split second. That was the whole reason I'd run over there in the first place, to help someone. Everything in me wanted to turn around and go back, but that same instinct, the one that had told me to get away, got even stronger. It was like every nerve in my body was screaming not to look. I started moving faster, then running. Behind me, the man called out again. And the second time, it sounded closer. Not a little closer, way closer. Unnaturally close, like whoever was yelling had covered a distance that should have been impossible in deep snow in only a couple seconds. I didn't turn around. I didn't even slow down to think about it. I ran the rest of the way to Ryan's house like I was being chased, lungs burning, legs heavy, heart hammering. By the time I got there, the whole surprise idea was dead. I must have looked completely unhinged when Ryan's mom opened the door. I was covered in snow, breathing like I'd sprinted a marathon, and I couldn't even get the words out smoothly at first. I told them what I'd seen, or what I thought I'd seen, and Ryan's dad immediately called the police. While we waited, Ryan and I went back and forth about it non-stop. He kept asking if I was sure, if maybe it hadn't been a plow, if maybe the driver had already stumbled away before I got there. He asked if I could have imagined part of it because of how dark it was. But I knew what I saw. I knew how real it looked. The headlights, the engine noise, the crushed front end. I hadn't just invented that. When the police finally arrived, they told us something that made my skin go cold. They said they hadn't found tire tracks on that road at all. Not fresh ones, not old ones, nothing. They searched the whole stretch I described, and according to them, there was no evidence a plow had been there in the first place. No tracks veering off the road, no marks leading into the woods, no crash site, nothing. One of the officers actually accused me of making it up. I tried to argue, tried to explain how ridiculous that sounded, because why would I lie about something like that? I remember practically begging them to take me seriously, to go look again, to at least act like they believed there was a chance I wasn't crazy, but the officer wasn't having it. Eventually they just left, and there was nothing I could do. I stayed at Ryan's house that night. I didn't want to walk back home in the dark after what happened. And honestly, I don't think I could have forced myself to if I tried. The next morning, once the roads were finally cleared enough to drive again, Ryan's dad drove me home. I've thought about that night a lot since then. Every time I replay it, I end up in the same place. There's no clean explanation that makes everything fit. Maybe I hallucinated it. Maybe my brain filled in blanks in the dark. But if that's what happened, that scares me just as much as the idea that the snowplow was real. Story 3. I'm Sebastian, but everyone calls me CB. This happened when I was a sophomore in high school, about 7 years ago now, and it's still one of the only things I can think about that makes me feel sick in that same exact way. I went to a private school in a nearby city, so public transportation was just part of my routine. Train in the morning, train again in the afternoon. It sounds annoying, but I honestly didn't mind it. A lot of my friends lived in the same general area, so we'd usually ride together, sit in the same spots, talk the whole time, and it became this normal social thing. If anything, it got us used to commuting early, which is kind of funny looking back. Back then, I was also a runner, cross country in the fall, track in the spring. During the off season, I'd catch the train right after school let out, around 3, and it was usually quiet. Mostly just the same handful of kids heading home. But during the season, practice didn't end until after 5:30, which meant the train was packed by the time we got on. It would be full of adults commuting back out to the suburbs, shoulder to shoulder in winter coats, everyone tired and staring at their phones. The only reason I didn't hate those late rides was because my two best friends, Charles and James, ran track too and lived along the same line. So even when the train was crowded and loud, I wasn't stuck alone. One night after practice, the weather turned on us the second our train pulled out of the station. It was midwinter, so even though it wasn't even 6 yet, it was already dark enough that it felt like night. And when I say it started snowing, I don't mean light flurries. It went from nothing to a full-on blizzard in minutes, like the sky just opened up. While we were still on the train, they made an announcement that ours was the last one running on that track. The forecast had been warning about a serious storm, and after our train left, they weren't letting any more go out. As we kept moving, the snow got thicker and thicker. The windows started to look hazy, and even the lights outside blurred. At one point, the three of us were genuinely wondering if we were even going to make it to our stops. And even if we did, it hit us pretty quickly that nobody was driving to come get us. The roads were already turning into a mess, so the reality was, if we made it home at all, we'd be doing it on foot. For James and Charles, that wasn't a big deal. They were basically next-door neighbors in a busier part of town, and their houses weren't far from their station. They'd be walking through neighborhoods with streetlights and other houses all around. My stop was different. My station was isolated. To get home, I had to cross a highway and then walk over a mile through this woodsy stretch. It wasn't deep wilderness or anything, but it was dark and empty even on a normal day, and in a blizzard, it was going to be worse. I called my parents from the train and explained what was happening. They didn't really have a solution. My dad told me I didn't have much of a choice. He basically said to bundle up, deal with it, and be careful. I remember feeling annoyed at the time, but I also understood there was nothing they could do. James and Charles got off at their stop first. We did that quick goodbye handshake thing, acting like it was normal, but I remember watching them step out and thinking how lucky they were. After that, the train ride thinned out fast. A couple more people got off at the next stops, and then the car was almost empty. By the time we reached my station, I was the only person left. The doors opened and I stepped onto the platform. It was completely deserted. Just me, the wind, and snow, coming down hard enough to sting my face. It was dark, but the snow actually made it easier to see. Everything was white, and the station lights reflected off it in this eerie, glowing way. It looked pretty in a way that didn't feel comforting at all. I stood there for a second, just taking it in, because I'd never seen that place like that before. Normally there were cars, people, noise. That night it looked abandoned. Then I started walking, because standing there wasn't going to help. For some reason, I expected the highway part to be the worst, but when I got there, there wasn't a single car anywhere. No headlights in the distance, no plows, nothing. I actually stopped for a moment, looking up and down the road in disbelief. It was strangely beautiful, like the whole world had shut off, and I was the only person left awake. I remember thinking I'd probably never see anything like it again. After the highway came the woods. Technically, I could have followed the longer road route home, but it would have added a lot of extra walking, and it was windy and wide open out there. So I chose the shorter way, and cut through the wooded stretch like I always did. At first, I kept my head down watching my footing because the snow was deep and uneven and I didn't want to slip. I don't know how long I'd been walking like that, but at some point I looked up after staring at my feet for what felt like forever. The second my eyes lifted, I had to fight back a yell. About 30 yards ahead of me, someone was standing in the snow. A man. He was facing me straight on like he'd positioned himself exactly where he knew I'd pass through. For a second, my brain didn't even process it as real because he wasn't dressed for the weather at all. He was wearing shorts and a short-sleeved shirt in the middle of a blizzard, and his face was stretched into this unsettling smile. Not friendly, not normal. It looked wrong, like his expression didn't match what was happening around him. I stopped without meaning to. I just stood there, staring at him. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he'd run out of a car and gotten lost. Maybe it was some kind of dare. But none of those excuses felt real enough to calm me down. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, smiling at me. I remember being frozen in place, not even thinking clearly, just waiting to see what he would do. Then, in one sudden motion, everything changed. He went from still and smiling to screaming and sprinting directly at me. It was so abrupt my brain lagged behind it. 1 second he was just standing there. The next, he was charging at me like an animal. That snapped me out of it. I turned and ran as hard as I could back the way I came. I was yelling for help even though I knew there wasn't anyone out there to hear me. The snow made it hard to move fast, and I could hear him behind me. I could feel him gaining ground with every second, and that terrified me more than anything because it meant he was fast and he didn't care about the snow at all. The chase felt endless. It was probably only a few minutes, but it felt like an hour of pure panic. My lungs burning and my legs heavy like they were filled with wet sand. I finally broke out of the wooded stretch and reached the road, and only then did I risk turning around. He was gone. He wasn't standing there. He wasn't running toward me. He had vanished into the white like he'd never been there at all. And somehow, that didn't make me feel safer. It made me feel worse. I felt nauseous, like my body didn't know what to do with that kind of fear. I stayed on the road and walked the rest of the way home. But the whole time, my mind kept circling the same thought. My footprints. They were basically the only tracks out there. If that man wanted to follow me, he wouldn't even need to search. He could just step into my trail like it was a map leading straight to my front door. When I finally got home, my parents were relieved just to see me. That changed when I told them what happened in the woods. My dad immediately wanted to go back out and look for the guy, like he could fix it by confronting him. My mom wouldn't let him. She was scared too, even if she didn't say it like that. A few hours passed, and nothing happened. Eventually, my parents went to bed. I acted like I was fine because I didn't want them panicking, but inside I was still shaking. I couldn't get that smile out of my head. And the sound of his screaming when he ran at me felt completely unnatural. The more I replayed it, the less sense it made. He was out there wearing shorts and a t-shirt. How was he even alive? How hadn't he frozen to death? I was spiraling, so I forced myself to stop thinking about it and tried to sleep. Of course I couldn't. It felt like the way you wake up from a nightmare and you're stuck in that half-panicked fog for a few seconds, except it didn't fade. It lasted for hours. I lay there listening to the storm and every small noise in the house, waiting for my heart to slow down. At one point, a tree branch scraped against my bedroom window. The sound was sharp enough that it jolted me upright. I got out of bed, irritated and scared at the same time, and walked to the window, thinking maybe I could move the branch away, or at least see what it was catching on. I pulled the curtain back, and I literally dropped to the floor, screaming. It was him. The man from the woods was right outside my window, inches away from the glass. In the light from inside my room, I could see him clearly now. His skin looked purple, like he was freezing. He was bald, and he had a patchy gray beard. His face was close enough that it felt impossible, like he'd teleported there the second I looked. My dad burst into my room, and he caught just enough of a glimpse through the window to see the man take off. My dad moved like he was going to run outside after him, but my mom stopped him and begged him to call the police instead. He did, with all the snow piled up. It took the police forever to reach our house. By the time they got there, the man was long gone. My dad didn't care though. He was furious because the snow made it easy. The man's footprints should have been right there, clear as day. That's what I expected too. I expected them to follow the tracks and at least try. But once the officers saw that the footprints led into the woods behind our house, they refused. They said they weren't going to go pushing through the woods in the middle of the night during a blizzard. My dad lost it. He got right in one of their faces, and it almost turned physical. In the end, the police left without doing anything. Nothing ever came from it. They never followed up, and I never saw that man again. Sometimes I wonder if he wandered into the trees and froze somewhere back there. But for weeks after that night, I was scared to be in my own house. And even now, I still have no idea what that man was, or how he made it from the woods to my window.